Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Margolis, and this is a podcast that I'm doing for my AP Biology class where I'm going to talk about what the class is like and maybe help you decide whether or not you should take it if you're considering it. A little bit about my experience with the class. I was an AP Biology student for the school year of 2016 through 2017 when I was a junior, and I had Mrs. Mahatka at Eastern Regional High School in Voorhees, New Jersey. So all of this is really going to be based on my experience with the class and Mrs. Mahatka as a teacher. I'm going to discuss what AP Biology is like and try to help you feel more prepared for the class or help you decide if you should take it. I'm going to talk about some specific topics that a lot of my classmates found challenging, as well as some questions or points brought up by students that I know might be taking the class. The first thing I wanted to talk about was studying and learning in the class. It's a lot of self-study, and you can talk about the topics in class, but I found myself looking in the textbook a lot before tests to refresh and to go over a lot of the harder topics, because it is hard content, detailed, and most people don't pick up on the concepts right away. I know I didn't. And the textbook was very helpful for reviewing what we talked about and getting in some last minute studying. Speaking of learning in class, it's very PowerPoint and lecture driven, so you should definitely be prepared if that's not how you like to learn. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was a common assignment that we got throughout the school year. I think about a total of 10 to 12 times. And these are really the biggest assignments you should get are the lab reports. Now, these are when you apply your knowledge that you gained in class to the actual real world. And it's really why you're even learning this stuff, to be honest. They can be very helpful with studying, and I recommend taking them seriously. For those of you who don't know, though, a lab report is when you do a lab in class, and after that, this is your write-up about it, where you talk about what you did, what you learned, and what all of your results mean in application to the world. They can be very helpful for studying, and I wouldn't take them for granted because they're very helpful. I mean, like I remember we did a potato catalase lab, and when I was taking the test related to that topic, I was remembering from the lab, oh yeah, this is what we did, this is what happened, oh yeah, that's the term that we used, and I used in my lab report. So I wouldn't just try and breeze through them. I would actually consider what you're doing. Now, at first, when you start doing the lab reports, you're going to think, oh, these suck. These are so hard. This is taking me forever. But as you go on and you get used to them, because every lab report is structured the exact same way, and you'll get used to it. I mean, practice makes perfect. Lab reports are also a very good GPA booster. So take them seriously because these can make or break your grade. A lot of the times I found that my GPA in the class would either go up drastically or go down dramatically depending on how well I did on these lab reports. And that all depended on how seriously I took them and preparation. So another thing we did in the class that you might have some experience with already if you've taken another science high school course. They're called POGILs, P-O-G-I-L-S. They're like packets filled with practice problems and also lessons and a lot of diagrams, lots of diagrams that give you a basis for the lesson that you're about to receive. They can be helpful sometimes. Other times it's like, why am I even doing this? When the lesson actually starts, though, you usually start to understand the topic more than you did when you started doing the POGILs. Because at first it's like, operon? What's an operon? I'm so confused. What are these diagrams? But by the time you actually get to the lesson in class, you reflect back on the POGILs and you're like, oh, that's okay. And you start to understand more. Like the lab reports, they can be a GPA booster. So do them don't blow these off because these go into your grade, at least in my experience. And they brought my grade up, so don't ignore these. The next thing I want to talk about is the two hardest topics that we talked about in class, according to my fellow students and myself. And that is the human genome and plants. This next section is going to be good to listen to if you're still considering AP Bio and you want to get a feel for what the lessons are like. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the human genome, which in the textbook that we use at Eastern is chapters 12 through 14. The big thing discussed in this section is DNA replication. So DNA replication is what's known as semi-conservative. So DNA replication results in new DNA, and as you probably already know if you took first year biology course, DNA is made up of two separate strands. Now, this new DNA produced from DNA replication consists of an old strand from the parent DNA and a completely new strand. So the way I like to think about it is, my analogy is that you are like your parents, but you're not exactly like them. Like, you have some traits that they also show, but you're not exactly like them. And that's what's going on with this new DNA. They're half their parent and half themselves. You may have already learned about something called an enzyme. Well, those are also involved in DNA replication, and there's three main ones that you need to be concerned with. There's DNA helicase. That's the first enzyme. It unwinds the DNA and separates the parent DNA for DNA replication. And then the next enzyme that you need to know about is DNA primase. It puts a primer on the DNA strands and gets them ready to replicate. The way I think about it is, it's like putting a helmet on before you play football. And once the primers are on, the body knows that the DNA is prime and ready to go. The third enzyme that you should know about is DNA ligase. During DNA replication, one of the two strands is replicated in fragments, and DNA ligase is the glue that comes in after replication occurs and connects them. Another thing involved with the human genome is RNA, which is like the opposite of DNA. It acts as a messenger for the DNA, carrying instructions for regulating the creation of proteins. So RNA is really used to say, all right, we need so-and-so protein made. Let's send out the message. It's all about getting amino acids to the ribosomes. That's basically what RNA's job is. And there's different types of RNA. There's messenger RNA, which takes a message from the DNA in the nucleus of the cell to the ribosomes of the cell, where proteins are made, which are located in the cytoplasm of the cell. And if you took a first-year bio class, like I mentioned earlier, you should already know or have a general idea about the structures of the cell. But if you forget them, you'll go over them in AP Bio. The next type of RNA there is transfer RNA. It transfers amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, to the ribosomes. And the third RNA type is ribosomal RNA, which makes up the ribosomes along with ribosomal proteins. The best part about RNA is that all of the different types have their job as their name, like messenger, transfer, ribosomal. So when you see it on a test, usually I'm just like, the job is right there. That's the function. There's a process involved with RNA known as transcription. Transcription is what produces an RNA molecule, the messenger, according to a specific template of DNA. And this transcription can produce either mRNA, tRNA, or rRNA, which is messenger RNA, transfer RNA, or ribosomal RNA. The way I think about transcription is the script is being made. After transcription comes translation. This is when the script is being translated from one language to the next. It's like you're going to put on a play, but the script is in French, so you got to translate that to English. What actually happens is the mRNA transcript is read by a ribosome and is then turned into a sequence of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. The way to think about it is mRNA is the actual message, but tRNA and rRNA are both used to get the RNA to its goal of becoming a protein, which is what's trying to be achieved. Alright, the next topic of discussion is mutations. Gene mutation is when DNA is permanently altered. And there's a few types of mutations. The first one I'll go over is called a spontaneous mutation. Spontaneous mutations result from odd occurrences during normal biological processes. Sometimes a base in DNA can be affected by chemical change, which completely messes up replication. This can affect future generations of DNA as it replicates, but it rarely ever happens. The second type of mutations that we see in DNA are called induced mutations. These can result from exposure to toxic chemicals or radiation. The environmental factors that can alter the composition of our DNA, such as toxic chemicals or radiation, are known as mutagens. Some mutagens are cancerous, such as tobacco has a lot of organic chemicals that are cancerous mutagens. Finally, the last topic I wanted to talk about under the human genome is what's known as biotechnology. This is basically studying and altering DNA. One of the things you'll talk about in this section is something called recombinant DNA. It's DNA from two different sources, so think of it as your DNA and foreign DNA are attached to make a new, usually better, strand of DNA. Another major topic of biotechnology is what's known as the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR for short. It's when DNA is rapidly copied. The DNA is then analyzed during gel electrophoresis after PCR. It's often involved with DNA fingerprinting for identifying people. A controversial topic involved with biotechnology is GMOs, and I'm sure this argument will still be going on by the time you take AP Bio. GMOs, if you don't know, they're organisms that have had a foreign gene inserted into them. And this raises a lot of issues that you'll go over in AP Bio, and I don't have enough time to talk about. Finally, one of the last things you'll talk about during the human genome section is what's known as gene therapy, which is used to correct the genotype of humans and also cure illnesses. But there's a lot more to it than just that. Alright, moving on to the next major section that I wanted to talk about that a lot of people have difficulty with is the plants unit. Sounds easy, but there's just so much to go over. It's chapters 23 and 24 in the textbook that I use during my school year, and if you go to Eastern and you take AP Bio, you'll probably use the same textbook. The unit usually opens up by talking about something called alteration of generations. It's basically plants have two alternating forms over the course of their life cycles. It happens to all land plants. The two forms aren't drastically different, but there are differences. The first one is called the sporophyte. It's the spore-producing generation, hence the name sporophyte. A spore is a reproductive cell that turns into a new organism. The second generation is the gametophyte. It's the gamete-producing generation. It develops both male and female gamete-producing regions, and during this generation, both sperm and eggs fuse to form a zygote, which, if you've taken an honors biology class or an intro to biology class, you probably already know what a zygote is. The second major thing talked about in the plants unit is a classification of plants known as vascular plants. They're plants with conducting tissue. There are two types of conducting tissue that are talked about. The first one is the xylem. The xylem, spelled X-Y-L-E-M, is the conducting tissue that brings water through the stem of the plant to the leaves. And the other type of conducting tissue is the phloem, spelled P-H-L-O-E-M. It's the conducting tissue that transports nutrients through the plant. Something that's also discussed is how plants reproduce, and you might already know that involves pollination, bees and pollinators. It's just pollen being brought to a plant to let fertilization happen and thus reproduction. After pollination, you'll talk about another type of plant known as angiosperms, or to put it more simply, the flowering plants. The major points talked about are pollen is transported from flower to flower, and you'll talk about how that happens. And also, flowers and fruits are only found in angiosperms, or flowering plants. You'll get a little bit into the cells of the plants, more than just the organelles, but also the types of cells. And the major one is the meristem cells. These are the first cells of a plant embryo. There are two types of meristems. There's the apical, APICAL, meristems, which are the meristem tissue present at the tips of young plants. And then the other type of meristem cell is the vascular cambium. It's a type of meristem that gives rise to vascular tissue called secondary growth. And I'm not going to get too detailed because I'm trying to keep things brief. The other type of plant cell that you'll talk about is the epidermal cells. These are the outermost layers of cells on non-woody and young woody plants. The outer walls of epidermal cells are exposed to the air and are covered in a cuticle to reduce water loss. And the waxy cuticle is usually found on things like apples or some types of leaves, and you'll see examples of these in the class. Alright, so that wraps up the brief kind of crash course on two of the more challenging units of AP Bio, and I'm going to get back into some more of the last word advice before I wrap things up. A question that runs through a lot of people's head before they sign up for the class is, have I taken the classes I need for AP Biology? The two classes that I strongly recommend are chemistry and anatomy. Going into AP Bio with those two classes underneath your belt can be very helpful. The beginning of AP Biology is a lot of chemistry, such as talking about water and diffusion, and you'll see a lot of compounds and elements that you might not be familiar with if you haven't already taken chemistry. That's why AP Biology is usually seen as a third or fourth year class. A big section towards the end of the school year of AP Biology is body structures and anatomy. That's all you talk about, body structures. Granted, I haven't taken the class myself, but I've had friends tell me that what they've learned in anatomy has also benefited them greatly in AP Bio with that unit, and they did pretty well. Another piece of advice that I really recommend you listen to, take a GPA booster the same year you take AP Bio. For example, I took choir my junior year because it helped balance out my grade in AP Bio. When I wasn't doing too well, I had choir to keep my GPA stable. So I had AP Bio on the lower end of the spectrum and then choir on the higher end. And it really helped me from having this GPA that my mom would have seen and been like, what the heck are you doing? All right, we're in the final stretch. The last things I want to talk about are warnings and misconceptions. I'll start with warnings. The first warning is make sure you're actually into biology before you take AP Biology. I was pretty sure I wanted to be a doctor when I started AP Bio, but in November of the school year, 2 months in, I figured out that I don't want to be a doctor, and it was kind of already too late to go back and take a different science class. At my school, you have to have 3 years of science to graduate. So it was already November and I was like, you know what? I'll just finish the school year. If I drop the class, what am I going to pick up? I would already be 2 months behind. I'll just stick with the class. And then the whole year, I'm just sitting in class questioning myself, thinking, what am I doing here? I don't even want to do this. Come on. Like, I just felt so stupid the whole year. Not stupid as in I couldn't take the test, but I felt regret. My second warning is don't get upset if you don't do well in the class. The material is hard and you need to give yourself credit. It's like any challenging class, like calculus or physics. You gotta give yourself credit for what you've accomplished and what you've done, and don't get upset over the bad test grades, because you can always do better and you can always work on improvement. But If you just beat yourself down, you're not going to get anywhere. So you get a bad test grade, move on, start focusing on the next one, and doing what you can to get a better grade. My third and final warning is the class is a lot of memorization. Basically, it's a high school class. You have to memorize a lot of things, and there is a lot of application as well, such as with the labs, but those usually only happen about once a month, maybe once every 2 months. There was a big gap in between when we did labs in the school year. I think from like the end of November to the beginning of February, we didn't do like any labs. So all the tests in between then, I forget what unit it was, but it was just all memorization. Everything was memorization. There was zero, I don't want to say zero, but there was a little application. So it's going to be a lot of memorization if you take the class. Finally, misconceptions about the class. The first one that I wanted to address was that AP Biology is the hardest class at Eastern Regional High School. I don't think this is true anymore. It used to be true, but based on what I've heard from my friends, my grade compared to them and their different science classes, I don't think that AP Biology is the hardest class anymore, based on rigor and test difficulty. I would say that actually goes more towards AP Physics nowadays, or AP Calculus. Definitely not AP Biology anymore. I don't think it's as challenging as those classes. Not saying that AP Bio isn't hard, it is, but it's not the hardest class. People usually take the class senior year, but that's just been like what people do. That's what they do. Like I mentioned earlier, there are classes to take before AP Biology, or even with AP Biology, but usually people like to take them before. People usually take the class senior year, but I think you could do it junior year like I did. I did well. People usually like to wait till senior year because they think it's the hardest class and they want to have the most knowledge for it and they want to be the most prepared. But like I said, I don't think it's the hardest class anymore. And I think you could take it junior year as well, but not sophomore year. Don't do sophomore year. I really think you need chemistry underneath your belt before you take AP Biology. And there were a good amount of sophomores in my class, actually. There were more sophomores than juniors in my class. And they seemed to all do pretty well, actually. So if you take AP Biology sophomore year, I would also recommend taking chemistry at the same time. It would really help you through that beginning. If you're worried that you're going to forget things from honors biology and that's why you want to take it sooner, like sophomore year or junior year, I wouldn't worry about that too much. The class actually reviews a lot of the things I had forgotten from honors biology, but when I saw the material, like osmosis, diffusion, the organelles of the cell, I remembered. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from honors bio, even though it had been like 2 years since I talked about the material. And even if it doesn't ring a bell when you talk about it, you have a textbook to look over, you have a teacher to ask for advice. I wouldn't worry about forgetting information, and you can go ahead and forget what you learned in honors bio if you want. Even if you don't want to, you probably definitely will, because most people take that freshman year. The last misconception I want to talk about is you're gonna lose sleep from the class. I actually found that this wasn't the case most of the time. The class, at least in my experience with Mrs. Mahatka at Eastern, there wasn't a lot of homework. Like, the only homework we would ever get is either finish a lab report or finish a POGL. And usually we got time in class to work on the POGLs and the lab reports as well, if you finished your lab early in class. The only time I ever lost sleep because of AP Biology is when I procrastinated on the lab reports, which we usually have a good week and a half, 2 weeks to complete, which is a good window of time. If you're able to, don't procrastinate and you won't lose sleep. I say if you're able to because when most people are told not to procrastinate, they still do. I'm guilty of that as well. So, if you can, don't procrastinate. If you can't, expect to lose some sleep the night before lab reports are due. And that wraps up everything I wanted to talk about. I hope I was able to help you, give you some advice on AP Biology and what to be concerned about. If you have any questions about something that I didn't address, or you just want me to go into more detail about something, comment them, and I'm sure I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening, and good luck in AP Bio, if you decide to take it. See you around.